What was shaping up to be a promising result for the Quakes took a turn for the worse and quickly spiraled out of control on the road against Real Salt Lake. There was some questionable officiating, some questionable defending once again, and a terrible individual mistake that ended up costing us points. My name is Kevin, I'm joined by Luis, and together with the Quakesaholics. In this video, we'll be covering this matchup between the Quakes and RSL and where the playoff hopes lie with only 9 games left. Luis, what were your initial impressions from this match?
Yeah, I felt like it looked really shaky, even from the beginning in terms of our back line, especially. But I thought we did create a good amount of danger. And after they scored the goal to tie it back up, after Martinez getting a great header, it just seemed like the wheels came off at the end of the game.
Almost quite literally from the first minute, or maybe second minute, we were exposed defensively. We were very lucky that Daniel, I believe, got a hand or foot on it. The ball eventually did hit the crossbar, and then later on in the game, RSL hit the post again. We got saved, honestly, by the post. It was like the man of the match for the first, 50, 60 minutes of the game. And then, yeah, I agree. The first goal that they scored was another just bad example of defending and the high line failing once again. And then the second goal, somehow, some way, ends up looking even worse. There was some kind of substitution mix-up. Espinosa comes off the field. Budo wasn't allowed on the field. They're playing down a player. RSL gets their goal. And it was just foreshadowing that, 2 minutes later, we'd have a player sent off and we would actually be playing with 10 men for the rest of the match. Very frustrating. I feel like we've had too many examples now of bad officiating that just leaves fans thinking that there is some kind of agenda against us. I don't think it's to that point, but at times definitely does feel that way. But I also do think that the Quakes kind of dug themselves a hole in this game, and we'll get into the defensive shape in a bit, but if you've been listening to the previous videos, this is probably going to sound very familiar. It'll definitely feel like deja vu. In terms of starting 11, it's pretty similar to what we've been seeing in terms of compared to the ideal lineup, quote unquote. We see Ricketts being played for Vitor Costa because Vitor Costa is still injured. And then in the back line, we have Wilson in the middle, Roberts on the left, Floriani on the right. Rodriguez and Romney once again sit on the bench. I think there's been a lot of changes in the back line. I think the last time we saw this configuration was 2 matches ago. And tactically, these players are being given the same instructions, so I think they're making the same kinds of mistakes. But Luis, what did you think of the 11 and overall just the tactics that we used in this match?
Yeah, I thought the 11, when I first saw it, looked okay. As things kind of developed, I started to be a bit more thoughtful, I guess, about our 11. Just generally, like you said, we were exposed from the very beginning of the game and kind of throughout the game. There was a lot of moments where we seemed to be overly exposed. The first goal in particular for Real Salt Lake felt super offside at first, but when you go back and look, you see Reed Roberts, maybe even Jamar Ricketts is keeping their left winger onside. And that's just a big problem that we've seen. I think also in the first chance that you mentioned, where that miraculously didn't go in after coming down off the crossbar, there have been moments where our back line is chasing back, where it seems like they're not sure if they should step up to trigger an offside trap or if they should just run back to, keep pace with the runners. There's moments where maybe the press gets broken down and midfielders are given too much space. And just overall, the defensive high line is a plan that constitutes quite literally living on the edge. And I think something that I was kind of thinking about is this is a bad system to have as much rotation in the back line as we seem to be having, whether it be through injuries or fitness or who Bruce thinks is going to execute the game plan the best. I feel like this is one of those things that is going to be very foreign to you if you haven't done it before. And the fact that we have, especially in recent months and matches, seen a lot of rotation between Floriani and Rodriguez or Romney and Reeds and maybe Jamar Ricketts coming on for Costa or Dewan Jones and Espinosa. All that rotation, I think, just adds even more chaos and instability to an already inherently chaotic system.
On top of that, we don't know how much of this rotation is due to just tired legs or Bruce thinking that certain players aren't playing up to his level and what's needed to execute this game plan. But yeah, I mean, we saw honestly, you could take a look at the past 3, 4, 5 games, and in each one of those, you can see the same situation being played out. I mean, it was Romney and Rodriguez against Houston, and then the game-winning goal for Seattle. I think it was Reed Roberts on that play. And in this game, like you said, Bruno Wilson, Roberts, Ricketts, all three of them in the same play in the first goal against RSL are caught on the wrong end of the offside trap. And we've talked about the benefits of just having this high line and how that gets our team set up better tactically in the attack. It lets us push the other team into their half, putting pressure throughout the whole game. But we're not really seeing that high line and like those conceptual or hypothetical benefits actually holding true, especially in these past games. And overall, it just feels like when we score goals, it costs us a lot of effort. But when it comes to giving up goals, it feels very cheap and it feels very easy for the other team. And I'm just concerned that at this point, we've been kind of discovered tactically. And I do think, I mean, we've been calling for this for a couple of games now. Just there needs to be some kind of tactical shift. We need to not risk so much because that risk isn't turning into enough of a reward to be justified.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that. I will say we have, for example, on Apple TV, it showed that we had, the higher XG in this game. And I do think also the goal from Martinez, it does come from Bruno Wilson kind of clamping down on an RSL attacker in their half and quickly passing it out to Chicho, who I think gets it to Espinoza and Espinoza to Martinez, something of that order. But yeah, you're right. And I think it's kind of, as we inch closer and closer to this kind of crucial period where playoffs are decided, it's more important than ever, I think, to kind of like we should have something settled down by now, but it feels in terms of the lineup, in terms of, and I think that the fact that that isn't settled may also give credence to the idea that this system is just not really working out. And it would be a shame to potentially miss out on playoffs or, at best kind of like squeeze in to the wild card position because Bruce Arena wants to just live or die by this high line.
Just putting aside the goals for and goals against as a result of this tactic, I think another side effect is that we're seeing that there's just a lot of tired legs in this team. And I think that was most evident with Rodriguez coming in the second half and after 10, 15 minutes already walking because it just seemed gassed from playing. And I mean, we saw Espinosa suffer from this as well. And that's a player that's been running in every game for almost the full 90. I can only remember one game that he took off in MLS games and then one Open Cup game. And I'm just concerned that as we go into these last 9 games, it's going to be more and more apparent that players just have a lot of wear and tear from the season. Specifically, I'm talking about players like Chicho and Harks and Bo that I think right now you see them playing and they do run for the full 90, but like at some point, like those miles are going to catch up to them. And I'm concerned about that happening in, the most critical part of the season right at the end.
I think that depth also has been an issue, definitely. And the way the MLS works now, it's a very, very busy schedule. We have a lack of midfield depth, which is something that we mentioned, kind of early on in the season. And I'm kind of curious if that is in part why maybe we haven't seen a tactical shift. I don't know. It could very, very well just be the fact that Bruce Arena, just wants to stick with this. But I also think that when we only have, Bo LaRue, Harks, Mark Anthony K, and I guess you could throw Nico in there as well as starting level center mids, it makes it to where if someone gets injured or something like that, or for fitness reasons, somebody just isn't available, it just like makes it to where having, maybe a traditional back four and then adding a midfielder in there, putting a lot of strain on the few midfielders that there are at Bruce Arena's disposal. I'm curious if maybe that's part of the reason why he wants to stick with the back three or five, depending on how you look at it, is because that allows for not as many numbers in that midfield.
Yeah, and you said starting level midfielders, and then you mentioned Mark Anthony K and Nico. I think in this game, when we saw those two come on the field, you just saw a pretty big drop off between what they can output and what Bolaru and Ian Harkes can output. And I think there's you're talking about having three midfielders. I think we can barely get by on just having two midfielders that are like truly not just starting level players, but impactful players. And yeah, I mean, we see that the transfer window just opened up. It'll be open until August 21st, I believe. So that does give us just under a month to kind of maybe bring in players in this very critical part of the season. I think definitely bringing in a midfielder can solve that. I've seen comments about, oh, why do we leave, or why do we let Hernan Lopez leave on loan? And I just don't think that Hernan Lopez was the kind of player that we needed as a backup for these players, or as the kind of player that could play as a number 10 and truly be a creator, which we've already talked about. But I think you're right. Something has to change, and I think this transfer window is the perfect opportunity for that change. So yeah, winding down on the season, we have 9 matches left. The difficult part of that is that 4 of those matches are going to be home and away games against Vancouver and San Diego, who are currently the 2 top teams in the West. So very unfavorable matchups. And then on top of that, we have another clash with LAFC that'll be at Levi's. So that's 5 very difficult games. The remaining ones are Houston and Austin on the road. But on the bright side, we do host St. Louis, and then we finish out the season hosting again against Austin FC. None of those really stick out as easy points. And I think the easiest one to look at is like St. Louis. They are currently 14th in the West. We would assume that that is a game that we should win, especially being at home. But then, yes, it was a rotation match, but it was a match that we already lost. And then I'm reflecting on the games that the Quakes have played. We're currently in 10th. You look at 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th in the West. Those are all teams that we've already given up a lot of points to. Against Galaxy, it was 2 points at home. In Stanford, that was a 1-1 draw. As I mentioned, St. Louis, we lost in the last minute. I think that was 2-1. Sporting Kansas City, we got totally blown out at home. Dallas, that was the 2-2 draw, right? And then Houston, I can't remember the result of that one, but I know we dropped points in that one. 3-3 draw, that's what it was. It's not promising that we've drawn against teams that are below us in the standings, and now basically all of the games that are remaining are not only against teams that are above us in the standings, but are at the top of the standings. So lots of negativity about playoff chances. It's definitely still possible. Like literally anything can happen. Yes, we're in 10th, but we are pretty close to the teams above us in terms of points. It's going to take a lot. And I think to get to playoffs, the Quakes are really going to have to pull off results that no one was expecting.
Yeah, no, it looks pretty kind of bleak, and it did not feel this way at all. It feels like this is just kind of come out of nowhere, seemingly. It seems like it's kind of been a trend, games like these where we should against opposition that looks favorable, and we just can't seem to get across the line. That's why we kind of highlighted this RSL game as kind of like a must win, really. Just because of these games coming up, somehow I think we're going to have to find points if we are trying to get into the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think the 2 things that are in the Quakes' favor right now is that next weekend we do have a rest. And some of these teams that we've highlighted are going to be competing in the Leagues Cup, so that's added minutes to them. It's kind of like when we were going through our super intense schedule in May with all the Open Cup games. And like we mentioned, the transfer window, I think that is going to be key. And I think if we can take advantage of the rest and take advantage of the transfer window, it is even more doable of making playoffs. But it doesn't change the fact that we're going to have to pull out results that we weren't expecting. Okay, and so the last thing we want to cover, it is a little bit difficult to speak on this because we don't know all the details, but we talked about it before recording. We kind of came to the same conclusion that being silent on this is kind of a form of approving, potentially. And so we did hear chants coming from the RSL supporter group yesterday, actually multiple chants against Chicho. This is a player that played with them last year. This is something that actually wasn't on my radar. I think, Luis, you mentioned that you did bring it up when we first signed him, but I must have just forgotten about it. halfway through the 2024 season, Chicho did receive a 4-game suspension. It wasn't really like a high-profile incident as far as I remember it. But then looking into it, it seems like MLS did intervene. They carried out an investigation, and the only thing that they reported was that there was some kind of violation of the MLS anti-harassment policy. Now, I tried finding what this policy actually is to see like, okay, what is the range of things that could have been done. I don't know if that policy is public or if just searching for any kind of MLS policies just like Google just pushes you to the MLS fan code or code of conduct. I forget the actual name, but that code of conduct seemed like it was specifically for fans and not the players. So I didn't want to reference that. So it's kind of hard to know what possibly could have happened. And like going back and looking at the statements, it's all very, very obscure on what actually happens. It's just that there was a policy violation and that there was a 4-game suspension, and really nothing further than that. It's very similar to the Bruce Arena situation in New England, where all we know is that something happened, and then I believe it was that he resigned, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe he was perhaps kind of pushed towards resigning. And I think there's a problem with this because it just leaves too much in the air on the severity of what was actually done. And I went through RSL's subreddit, and then, I mean, even going through the comments on our social media posts, the San Jose Earthquakes official media posts, you see a lot of very negative comments being said, and honestly, a lot of accusations. And I think that it is because there isn't a conclusive, hey, this is what happened. And so I think a lot of people are just kind of left to assume things. And on one hand, you can assume that since it was only a 4-match suspension, that it probably wasn't something more severe than whatever Bruce Arena did, because he did have to resign. And we've seen other cases in the league. The one that comes to mind is Andy Polo at Portland Timbers. His contract was terminated when evidence came out that he was involved in domestic violence. But on the other hand, you could assume, and I think this is what a lot of RSL fans have done, is that these match suspensions and a lack of a real statement on what happened is maybe MLS's way of just kind of sweeping things under the rug, and that they're scared of whatever the severity was could actually be, really bad PR or marketing for MLS, and they just didn't want to face that public backlash. And it's just disappointing that there isn't a conclusive, hey, this is what happened. And yeah, we don't, at least from what we talked about before recording, I don't think we have a very conclusive stance on what the Quakes should have done, what RSL should have done, what MLS should have done, other than just that when these kinds of incidents happen and policy violations happen, we would want more transparency. Because from what we know of Chicho, and I also did read up on like what LAFC fans' reactions were. That was a team he was at previously. They seemed very surprised by this because he didn't give off those kinds of impressions. And I mean, from what I've seen, I would agree with the LFC opinions that I've seen. But you just never know what happens behind closed doors, and I think that's what's scary. And you think about the influence that these kinds of high-profile players have, and the people that they can be interacting with. It's scary to think about. But yeah, again, there's nothing conclusive on this, so I'm not making any accusations. But it is disappointing to be in this situation for sure.
Yeah, it's kind of like that corporate language, like you said, that just sort of says as little as possible while not staying completely silent. That just leaves a lot of room for speculation, and obviously it doesn't help when you have RSL fans as outspoken as they seem to be online and in the stadium as well. And yeah, we've seen this before, of course, with Bruce Arena, and it's just kind of tough. I think can lead to some kind of cognitive dissonance. It's just kind of the nature of the MLS. It's just kind of keeping things vague to kind of keep things all fine and dandy.
Yeah. And I did find one article that kind of went over why the silence is a problem. And I think one of the last paragraphs also kind of maybe paints some insight into this. they said, when Chicho returns, I expect it will be to loud cheers. If the goals start flowing again, I expect many fans won't really think about this incident again, but be careful because in the silence surrounding Chicho's suspension, RSL and Chicho are speaking volumes. And yeah, that last sentence I definitely think is true, and that's I think why we wanted to at least spend some time talking about this. But I also do agree with the first sentence in that, yeah, I think if Chicho had played well in the second half of the season when he came back from suspension, maybe they wouldn't be as loud about this. And we did talk about this. I do remember this, that Chicho's form in the second half of 2024 was really, really bad. And I wonder also how much of that plays into fans just being negative towards him, which I don't think is a good thing or a bad thing. It's just, I don't know, I guess some insight into human nature. But yeah, I think we spent enough time on this given how little actual evidence there is around this. But yeah, disappointing for sure. So yeah, looking ahead, next weekend the Quakes do have some time off. Hopefully the legs get rested up, and then we will be finally back at PayPal Park against Vancouver Whitecaps. Every one of these games is just closer and closer to being a must-win game, and there's also Vancouver and San Diego are going to be super tough matchups. I do think that those are our next 2 home games, so hopefully the stadium can get packed. The fans are there because the team really needs the support. We will for sure be there, and we will for sure be here to cover it with whatever happens. So if you made it this far, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you all next time.
Thank you.